Welcome to the Deep Dive,
Emerald City Hockey's Seattle Kraken podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Deep Dive, Emerald City Hockey Seattle Kraken podcast. And boy, RJ, really wished we had made last week's 2-hour episode a two-parter. We could have just uploaded part 2 today because we're digging for content a little bit this week.
I'd say so. Yeah, that was a brilliant idea, the two-parter idea that you came up with maybe 5 seconds after we finished recording the last one. But you know what? We gave everyone the whole coaching discussion all at once. I think it's probably still for the best. But yeah, we're not a lot to talk about this week.
Yeah, so we'll be talking about the Firebirds. We'll be talking about the latest rumors around the Kraken coaching search, and also some rumors of some players that are going to be available this offseason from other NHL teams that the Kraken could potentially trade for. Not talking about Mitch Marner this time, which is good.
Thank goodness.
So we'll be talking about some other options that might be available to the Kraken should they wish to get involved in all of the wheeling and dealing. Before that, want to plug real quick the prospect chat that I have tonight over at patreon.com/Emerald City Hockey. We're going to be looking at some more draft eligible prospects. We did that last week. I think we'll probably look at video for some of the top options tonight for who the Kraken could take at 8. We can kind of compare the defensemen that'll be available at 8 with the forwards that'll be available at 8 and kind of see what direction we think we want Ron Francis to go in. So that should be a lot of fun. Again, that's going to be tonight at 7 on patreon.com/Emerald City Hockey. And then, of course, got to thank the Beer Hall, RJ, Queen Anne Beer Hall, for sponsoring this podcast as always.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, great place to go watch a Mariners game. Are they still doing well, Dylan? I feel like the Mariners just keep chugging along.
I sure. Last time I gave what I thought was a very good take, and people in the comment section said that I was giving like stone cold Mariners take. So I don't know. I acknowledged that they were playing well, and I guess maybe people were worried I was jinxing it.
Yeah, well, I mean that's always a worry with the Mariners, right?
Well, gun shy.
There's too many games still, and I can't keep track of them all.
It's way too many games. Look, the Mariners have now played 47 games. They'd be over halfway done if they were a hockey team.
Can you imagine?
and it's we're still in May. Like there's still like 5 months left of baseball season. It's so much. But hey, the Mariners are still in first place. They are still doing well. Got a really good home record too. Got to figure out things on the road. And we'll see if that upsets people this time.
If I can go on a quick
stats.
Yeah, if I can go on a quick aside, though, something that our buddy Charles with Circling Seattle Sports brought up to me that should have been obvious. Like, this was toward the end of the Kraken season. And as soon as I thought of it, like, well, yeah, duh. But I had never thought of it before. They don't practice. Like, during the season, they don't practice. And it's just so weird to me, having covering hockey and how often they practice. They don't have time to practice. They have games every day. That is the practice.
Right. Yeah. Your pregame, like, warm-up stuff is your practice. Like, you come out on the field, earlier in the day and throw the ball around. But I mean, what is there to practice?
What is there to practice?
Like yeah. There's all the practice stuff is a lot of individual stuff that they do, right? Like, I would argue that all of the hitting work that they do in the cages with the hitting coach is practice, right? But it's just part of like pregame routine for everybody. But I would argue that that's practice because you're working with the coach and you're working on the little things to get better, and you're working on the pitching matchup for that night. I don't know. I'd argue that's practice.
Yeah, I guess they do practice. They just don't have like the team practices that we're used to from hockey with everything. But while the season goes, but yeah, where's the time to do it? It's just such a different sport.
Where's the time and what do you do? Like, how do you practice the whole team at once? Like, it's not like any other sport. It's all like individual. You can only have one guy come up to the plate at a time. Gonna do.
That's true. Like, everybody get in position. I'll just throw a soft pitch. You hit it this way, and we'll practice fielding it.
Yeah, like it's. I don't know. So that's that. But Mariners doing well, and of course you can watch all of their games, home and away, at Queen Anne Beer Hall. So definitely want to thank them. And then, I mean, I guess we'll just get into it, RJ.
Get excited, Dylan. We're about to talk about the Coachella Valley Firebirds, yes. Pacific Division playoff champions, yes. As they swept the Ontario Reign last night. Did you get the chance to watch any of that game?
I did. I watched most of that game. because, I wanted to see how the team was going to respond after the Shane Wright injury and missing Shane Wright for that game. I wanted to see how they were going to respond to the fact that, it was an illegal hit. The player for the Reign was suspended. We'll get into that stuff in a second. I wanted to see how they were going to respond to that. And I wanted to see if they were going to still have, that kind of killer instinct to just put this series away. Right? Like just go out there, finish the sweep, get it done, and then now go and wait because the other series only has had one game played. So you got to wait a little while to see who you're going to play in the Western Conference Championship. But that's probably good. It gives them some rest, gives Shane Wright some time to recover. But I mean, that team, RJ, is just so good.
Yeah, they are a great team. They're fun to watch. A big comeback win after going down 2-0 in that game. And Bilesma just seems to be pushing all the right buttons with this team. And we were a little worried at the start of the playoffs. They dropped the first game of their first round series and almost dropped game 2. And that's a really tough hole to climb yourself out of. But they got the overtime win there. And it's just been wins since, right? They haven't lost a game since as they went on to close out that series and then sweep Ontario. They are looking like the Firebirds playoff team of last year. And I think they kind of, as we mentioned a couple of weeks ago on the podcast, I think they kind of needed that wake up call, but man, the guys took it to heart.
Yeah, they did. They're just like, there's a lot of different things. I know we're going to talk about all of it because like, that's really like the Kraken organization. What they're doing right now is this team, the Firebirds. But like when I watch them, it's the fact that they have such a solid leadership group, and this comes from the coaching staff and the players on the ice and the leadership group that the players have. But it creates such a culture that you even look at a game like last night, and they, you finish the first period, you're down 2-0, and the team just comes out, and you then have to survive like 5 minutes of Ontario coming out strong in the second period, right? Like, and then the team just decides, oh yeah, no, we still got this. Like we can do this. We go out there, we get a goal from Cole Lind, and then everything just shifts, and you just control the game the entire rest of the time. And that's the stuff that championship teams have, teams that go on deep playoff runs in any sport, right? You have that group and that culture where you just go out there and you're going to do your work and you're going to trust in that. You don't ever get panicked, right? You don't get panicked when you drop game 1 of a series or you've got to come back in game 2 like they did in round 1, right? Like they never panicked through that process. That's why they were able to come back and win that series. You don't panic in situations like last night where you're missing Shane Wright. You don't let yourself get emotional about that. You don't let yourself get emotional about the fact that the Reign jump out to an early lead. You just go out there, you trust your process, you trust what you do, and that's why I think this team is able to, both in the regular season and the playoffs, they have so many comebacks. Like this team just comes back from any deficit at any time. They'll force overtime. They know they're going to win in overtime. They just have that confidence about them and what they do and in each other. And it's so rare in sports, and it's just so special because, like I said, those are the teams that win championships.
Yeah, definitely. It's powerful when you believe in what you're doing and the system you're running, that you can come back from whatever, and especially in a game like hockey that is just so momentum based, especially in the playoffs. When you see a team that has a firm grasp on that, like it's special. It's something we remarked on even last year, right, in the playoffs when we went to go watch some of those games in the conference finals, in the Calder Cup finals, about just something unique about this team. And so, it's no coincidence that they're going back to the Western Conference final for a second year in a row. Well, their second year of existence. Yes. They've never done any worse than that, and just that's really hard to do in a league like the AHL too, where there's so much turnover player wise. Just speaks to how strong a foundation that organization has.
Yeah. And then, you start looking at other things that kind of, help make this team work. And I think the first thing that I look at and that has been on display during this postseason run is just the depth scoring, right? Like this is not a top heavy team where it's just like 1 or 2 guys that are really just outpacing other teams and they're able just to score 2 goals a game, right? Like that line generates like 2 goals a game for their team. And then you're able to kind of coast that, at least through a round or two, especially in a league like the AHL, you can kind of do that. No, the Firebirds are built like a championship team in the sense that they've got 8 players with 5 or more points. They've only played 7 games. Right? Like that's insane level depth. And then if you want to extend it out to 4 points, so you're talking about guys that are over half a point per game, on this roster, not counting guys who haven't played all the games, but just like looking at it straight up, 4 points or more, 12 players. Got over half the roster at over half a point per game. Like, that's insane.
Yeah, it is. And you go down even further, and every skater who's played in playoffs has a point.
Yeah.
At least a point.
Yeah. Chris Drieger.
Yeah, Chris Drieger, the only one
putting up the goose.
Get it together, Driegs.
So like that's the kind of stuff that's also remarkable about this, is just to have that level of depth and have that level of commitment. And I think that's where the system comes in too, where everybody, that system is just good, for one, because everybody can produce in it, but it works really well at highlighting what all of these different types of players are good at, and it puts them in spots where they can succeed individually and be part of the whole. And when you're part of the whole, you're going to pick up assists. You're going to be like a Cameron Hughes, who doesn't have a goal yet, but he's got 5 assists, and he's really helping make his line mates look a lot better and play a lot better in this postseason, because that's what his role is right now. And it's one of those things where it just shows how great really the coaching has been at kind of setting all of this up and creating this opportunity for everybody.
Yeah, I'm trying not to even get too far to the coaching right now, because we're gonna talk about the coaching news later. But I've just all these indications, I'm trying to keep myself right now from just talking about how great the coaching's been and how nice it might be to import all of this to Seattle. But I'll hold off on that for a second. One thing I do want to talk about also, in addition to the players and the coaching, is the fans. Did you see how many Firebirds fans came out to that road game in Ontario for Game 3? They took over the building.
Yeah, when I first turned it on, I had to double check. I was like, wait, this is in Ontario, right? Like, it was a ton of them. I mean, they are so proud. Like, that's the first thing that hits you when you go to a Firebirds game. It hits you in the parking lot, right? It hurts you in the line to get into the parking lot, really, as there's just so many people there to go and support that team and that organization. And you get out of your car, you walk through the parking lot, and you're just seeing fans decked out in Firebirds gear. You're getting up to the front of the arena, and everybody's hanging out, having a big pregame party in that kind of little courtyard section that they have, waiting to be led into the building. And it all starts from there, and then it just continues and grows and builds as you get closer and closer to game time. And then when the Firebirds skate out and they skate through that fire and that building erupts, you just know that it's going to be a good time. But those fans, they are so committed, that they really do. The Valley is just so committed to them. It's really fantastic.
Yeah, it's right up there with playoff atmospheres we've seen in the NHL. Like,
yeah.
It's just something to behold, and that's something I've never seen before at the AHL level.
No, you definitely don't typically see that at the AHL level, and it has been really, really fantastic to see for them. Yeah, I mean, what else do we want to talk about here? I mean, obviously, this is another run fueled by, realistically, an NHL caliber goaltender, right? Like, the Firebirds are fortunate enough to have Chris Drieger a year after they had Joey Daccord. Driegs is putting up great numbers, 239 goals against average, 921 save percentage. And it's one of those things where I feel like he doesn't, or at least the goaltending for the Firebirds doesn't always get enough credit for how aggressive it allows the rest of the team to play. Talked about this a little bit last week when we talked about Dan Bylsma and what kind of systems he runs. But Dan Bylsma could be a pretty aggressive coach right now with the Firebirds and the system that they run, right? They're running that 2-1-2. They're having 2 guys going out there on the attack. If a team's able to transition and get past that, right, then you've got less defenders coming back. You need to rely on your goaltender. In the defensive zone, right, sometimes they get a little passive with the zone defense, and it allows teams to have prolonged zone time and get a lot of shots off on the goaltender. Chris Drieger this year is being the man, and he's kind of handling that stuff. And so I just wanted to give a shout out beyond just the fact that he makes big time saves, all that kind of stuff. The system really puts a lot of pressure on these goalies, and for the second year in a row, the Firebirds have a goalie who's kind of able to withstand that storm and really help them build off of that with the aggressive approach going back the other way.
Right. Having NHL caliber goaltending 2 years in a row is really going to help you get to this point. And also, I feel great for Chris Drieger, because he has taken this opportunity and run with it. It's never easy when you sign a contract at the start, like with the Kraken when he came in and expecting to be potentially the team starter, and ending up in the AHL by the end of it is never easy. But man, he has done everything he can in this opportunity, and he's going to earn an NHL spot at least as a backup next year. Like there must be a lot of teams. Goaltending is in very high demand. If I'm an NHL team that needs a goalie who can step up potentially, even a competitive team like the Devils, the Kings, maybe you're looking at Chris Drieger and what he's doing right now, and you're thinking that's a guy I might want to give a shot. I hope he gets that opportunity. I'm sure he will, but yeah, I mean the run's not over. Like the further he goes, the more teams are going to be calling, I think.
Yep. And now, like I alluded to earlier, Firebirds are going to be able to get a little bit of a rest here as they await the winner of the Grand Rapids Milwaukee series. Grand Rapids leads that series 1-0 right now, RJ. I've been kind of thinking all year long it's just going to be a rematch last year, Milwaukee versus Coachella Valley in the Western Conference Finals. We'll see what ends up happening there. But, I mean, Firebirds, the earliest that series can end would be Wednesday, right? Firebirds are going to have, 4 days off just for that, and then figure another day or two while they set up the next series and travel gets all handled. Like the Firebirds are going to probably have close to a week off now because they were able to take care of business against the Reign, and I got to imagine that's good for them. It's one where I would maybe worry for some groups that then you'd maybe get a little bit rusty, right? And that kind of plays a role for you. We saw that with like the Florida Panthers when they were waiting for the winner of the Boston-Toronto series, and then they looked a little rusty in game one of that second round. But I just think because, again, the leadership that this team has, whether it's coming from the coaching staff or from the players, I'm not worried about that at all. I think it's just going to be nice for them to kind of get a bit of a rest and work on stuff in practice, and then just keep the vibes rolling once they know who their next opponent will be.
Yeah, definitely. And especially with the travel starting, the real travel starting. I mean, you look at this last series in Coachella Valley versus Ontario, that's a pretty short bus ride away, which, by the way, love what that's doing for the rivalry between those two teams. I think that series really has established that rivalry because it got nasty. But also with the Firebird sweep, Ontario is going to want some revenge next year. But yeah, that time off, I'm not worried about it. I think it'll affect them maybe max one period, just because they're a well-coached team. And also, I mean, I am kind of rooting for that other series, Grand Rapids versus Milwaukee, to go as long as it possibly can for a couple different reasons. One, the other teams, beat each other up, but also I do have a trip down there scheduled for the 28th. So the longer that goes, the more chances of games that maybe we can get to.
Yes, that would definitely be a lot of fun. I'd love to be able to go to a game with you. I was really bummed that I had to miss this weekend. I missed the whole series basically in this week.
It goes fast, doesn't it?
It was so fast, so fast. I was hoping that I could get out to one of the games this weekend, but I just couldn't with all the commitments around my sister's stuff. So it was a little bit unfortunate that I'm having to wait until round 3 to be able to go see the team. But I'm really pumped for when I do get out there. The other thing that the prolonged rest will be good for RJ is going to be getting Shane Wright back out there. So we should talk about that. In game 2, he took a late hit, an extremely late hit, like
extremely late,
like enough of a late hit that I'm like questioning how it even happened in the first place, right? Like you can't even make the argument that that he was trying to hit Shane Wright. Like it was a little late, but like it was maybe within a playoff window of opportunity. Like it was just nowhere close how late this hit was. Shane's down on the ice for a while after the hit, lower body injury. It sounds like on the update today was that he was pushing to try to play last night, and that the team, I think, smartly held him out of that and kept him away from that. But any amount of time to get Shane Wright back up and ready to go is going to be beneficial for this club.
Right. It was good to see that report from Shad Powers of the Desert Sun saying that Wright skated with the team on Sunday. He was lobbying to play in the game, but the team chose to be cautious with him, which, again, good decision. I definitely like that they're doing that. But yeah, sounds like a safe bet. He''ll be available for the upcoming series. It's not a serious injury, which definitely relieved to hear that, given how bad that hit was. I mean, you said how late it was, but it just you pause the video, which I put on social media. Like the puck is already maybe 5 feet away from Shane Wright. He makes the pass. He passes the puck out to a teammate. It's already maybe 5 feet away from him, and the player who hits him, Hayden Hodgson, is still half the length of the neutral zone away from him. like
Yeah.
full, blue line to red line, to center red line length away from him. I mean, just very, very late hit. And not the first time we've seen something like this from Hayden Hodgson.
Nope.
People might actually recognize his name. We got a few comments like, wait, isn't that the guy who hit Mark Stone in the preseason? Yes, it is. That's the same guy. Mark Stone was furious at him, and I think just ended up going after Brant Clark and scaring him. But there was that whole incident during the preseason, and there's been a couple incidents during the season of Hodgson delivering similar late hits on players in the AHL. I mean, we won't delve into it because I don't see him really making any difference at the NHL level at all,
No.
kind of like what Mark Stone said. But still, he was also suspended 2 games for that hit, which will carry over into next season for them.
Yes, yes. And you know what? Refreshing a little bit, RJ, just to see a suspension for something like that, right? Like bad hit, league takes it seriously, suspends for multiple playoff games. A guy could
What
get
a
used to
concept.
that.
Yeah, we just import everything over from the AHL to the NHL.
Seriously. So yeah, that was a welcome kind of bit of news after everything else that happened around that Shane Wright hit. So yeah, I mean it's all gonna be good for them getting the rest, get Shane back up and ready to go. The unit is just all so solid, and that's where like the depth comes in too, because let's say you have 1, 2, 3 guys that are guys that need to be playing every day, right, for their rhythm, because everybody's different. There are players that kind of do need that. When you have the depth that the Firebirds have, you can survive that, right? You could allow a couple guys that need to be playing more frequently in actual games. They can take that first game because you've got this incredible depth, and so I'm really excited to see what they can do against either the Griffins or the Admirals. It'd be fun to play the Admirals just because they got so much press this year. It'd be nice to beat up on them again, but we'll see.
It'd be a fun rematch for sure. I mean, they'd want revenge after the meeting in the Western Conference Finals again last year.
Yeah, yeah. So it's all good in the just trying to get to the ultimate AHL Calder Cup final against Hershey Bears, because we all know they're gonna be there.
Totally.
All right. Anything else about the Firebirds you want to talk about before we move on to the Kraken?
No, I'm just excited to see how it goes for him. It'll be a shame to have to wait a few days for another game.
Yeah, yeah. And then we'll, when it gets a little bit more into the off season and stuff, we'll look at more of like kind of how the Firebirds roster might look for next year, because I think it's going to be a little bit different.
It'll be their biggest challenge yet.
Yeah, than what they've had to do these first 2 seasons there. Transitioning to the Kraken, RJ, we've had the smallest update possible, I believe, in regards to the coaching search for the Kraken, and it comes from Elliot Friedman via the 32 Thoughts podcast twice now, getting the same update. How about that?
Yeah, that's right. Today, actually, he gave essentially the same update as he did a week ago. But when talking about the Kraken's coaching search on 32 Thoughts podcast, he was kind of going team by team. And he said, Seattle, I think there's 3 names: Dan Bilesma, Todd McClellan, and Jay Leach. And then he also added that there may be some internal disagreement on the hire. He said at different times, I think people have argued for different people, which I would expect. I would hope that not everybody was in complete lockstep in an organization, right? I think there's really nothing to that. I mean, people should disagree in any kind of healthy environment. So first of all, though, Dylan, on this report, before we get into the implications if this is true, how much are you really believing that this is the case? I certainly believe that those are the 3 names that Elliot Friedman is hearing.
Yes.
But we know that the Kraken are notoriously secretive about these sorts of things. Remember the Dave Haxtell hire originally? Mm-hmm. It was a name that really nobody saw coming. Rick Tocchet was kind of the name that was out there a bunch. He'd had 3 interviews, but it ends up being Haxtell and catches a lot of us by surprise. And is it a coincidence that Friedman, the names that he's hearing are the 2 obvious internal candidates who are obviously associated with the team in Bilesma and Leach, plus the 1 name that's already gotten out that they've interviewed in Todd McClellan? So how much should we really read into this report?
I mean, you got to take it seriously, because like he is, quote unquote, like the best of the business when it comes to this kind of like insider stuff. I would argue that for really a lot of the NHL insiders, that holds a lot more water when you're talking about Eastern Conference teams than Western Conference teams, and then the further out west you get, the less and less that kind of tends to be the case. I'm with you. I can't believe that those are the only three names kind of going around the building and around the organization, just because that seems a little quick, right? Especially because Francis kind of made it sound like they were going to take their time with trying to figure this one out. And you could understand why, right? Like they need to make sure that they nail this next coaching hire, because if you don't, you look at a large portion of the core of what this team has been, and they've got like one coaching life cycle left in them, right? Like that's kind of it for them. And with more and more prospects, your homegrown talent coming in and going to be added to the organization over the next year or two, you want to make sure you're starting them all off on the right foot, or you're continuing Maddie and say Riker Evans development, all that kind of stuff. It's a big deal hire for where this franchise is at the moment. And so I got to think that they want to take their time, and narrowing it down to three candidates, two of which are internal after only 2 weeks of, searching, seems a little quick unless you're just really, really all in on at least one of those. So that's kind of where I'm at. I got to think there's more going on behind the scenes that just nobody's really privy to, because it's Seattle. It's a little out of the way, and they're a pretty good organization at keeping things secret.
Yeah, I agree with that. You have to think they've cast a wider net than that. They certainly should. I think the organization's smart enough to do due diligence on more guys than that, and maybe not have it that narrowed down to this point, unless they're all in on say a Dan Bilesma and they've received indications that maybe he is interested, and then you kind of like, all right, well, we'll interview a few others and just kind of wait for this to play out. But I don't know that that's the case. So let's approach it though. If it is true,
Yeah.
if it is just narrowed down to these three names, what are our thoughts on that potentially being the situation? Because, I mean, my first thought is if those are the three names, it better be Bilesma. And I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah.
That's my thought.
I would imagine that like all of Kraken Nation agrees with that. I agree with it for sure. I got to imagine that everybody agrees with that one. I was trying to think about it, and I was wondering if it was a situation where I have two thoughts. If this is the real situation and it is the three names involved, I had two thoughts as to what that might be. One, which is that Todd McClellan is a fairly sought after, for some reason, NHL hire, and a lot of teams have been interviewing him, and he's pretty in demand, and that the Kraken, are one of the teams that really do want his services, and he is like the guy at the top of their list. And then you're keeping the internal candidates as basically backups for if he chooses somewhere else. Right, if he decides to go to a different team, you can then go to Bilesma or Leach and then offer them the job, and you feel comfortable enough with them, but you have the big kind of fish that a lot of teams are interested in circling there.
You're scaring me, Dylan.
I know. Well, that's only one of the two options. That's only one of
Okay.
the two options. The other option is if Bilesma has been a little bit on the fence about it, right, internally with what he's talked about and all that kind of stuff, then you as the Kraken dangle a Todd McClellan and a courtship for someone else to maybe try to get him to go like, well, look, if you don't like kind of commit to us at some point here, we'll go in this other direction, right? Like we've got another good coaching option if you don't, kind of let us know. That those are the only two like things I can think of with this like group of three people, and I certainly hope it would be the second of those two options rather than the first one, but I do think that the first one is probably more likely.
Yeah, of those two, I'd have to say, yeah, the first one would be more likely, but still, I hope it's neither of those two. But yeah, I don't like either of those options that you just said, though. So we'll see. I mean, I would think Dan wouldn't. Maybe he would be on the fence. I don't know. It's tough to leave that spot, right? And I don't know. I would hope that he would have his mind more made up than that, one way or the other, just for the Kraken's sake.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is difficult. But if it is those three names, Like I said, I think it better be Bylsma because you have, I think, a very good candidate in Bylsma. I mean, look, we went over this for 2 hours last week.
Yeah.
We know that we're both in support of Bylsma. You know my thoughts on Todd McClellan. I even elaborated more on the Red Glare podcast last week. And then Jay Leach, while I think he might be a good head coach, even right away potentially. I mean, he interviewed for the Sharks job, right? It would be a completely uninspiring hire. We talked about it last week too, but just not the right guy for this team in this moment. So I don't know. I'm hoping that report isn't entirely true.
Yeah, if you go with like just talking about the two internal candidates in like slightly different way than what we did last week, right? If you go with Jay Leach, I feel like you're going for, to some extent, some continuity from the previous, guy in Dave Hackstall. And I just don't know that, I don't know that you want to do that, right? Like, we're looking at this team, and I was going to save this for when we talk about the trade targets, but they're a team that if if it's playoff or bust next year, you need to make up 20 points in the standings, right? And
That's a big gap.
It's a huge gap, and obviously you're going to have free agency, you're going to have Shane Wright coming in, you're going to have in theory, you should be upgrading the roster to help make up that 20 points. But part of it has also got to come from whatever coach you hire, right? Like, that's got to be part of this 20 points as well. And I feel like if you go with Jay Leach, it's because you feel like he has a good rapport with the leadership group and the core group that you already have, right? That's the reason to go with somebody like him, is because he already has experience with the guys. He's already familiar with them. They're familiar with him. They trust him. They like him. They want to play for him, all of that stuff. But again, this team isn't good enough as is, right? Like, it would be a different situation if this was a team that was a wild card team that then wasn't performing in the playoffs. You could say, okay, let's trade him out for somebody else that they like internally and that they play well for. But I don't know that when you need to make up 20 points in the standings, going with somebody who's getting their first NHL, head coaching job is going to be risky in and of itself. But then on top of that, you're just also porting over somebody from the previous regime that didn't really, that leaves you in this 20-point hole. And so that part of that aspect of it, I'm a little unsure about. Whereas I feel like if you go with Bylsma, I got to imagine this would be part of the internal debate around Dan Bylsma. If you're the Kraken and your Kraken leadership, is he's the perfect guy to develop and continue the trajectory for players like Riker Evans, Shane Wright, and even some of the other guys that are going to be coming in, because you got to think that you'll keep as much of the system and culture in Coachella Valley as possible. So it makes it easier as in years 2 or 3 of his coaching, contract with the Kraken, you're looking at guys like David Goyette, Yanni Newman, those kinds of guys graduate and come up to the NHL level, and they're able to play in the similar or same system that they've been playing in. They're going to be able to hit the ground running, right? Ryan Winterton, Logan Morrison, all that kind of stuff. They're going to be able to keep that momentum from when they first hit the NHL because they know what they're doing. They're used to playing in this system, and you kind of have that cohesion between the two organizations. And that's very attractive, but that's also a slightly longer term approach that you're taking. And so I got to think, if the internal debate is playoffs next year versus who's going to be better for the next core that we have coming, I could see people being on either side of Dan Bylsma for those two reasons. Because if it's playoff or bust, I don't know that you want Dan Bylsma as much, because really the stuff that makes him work and makes him attractive to you as an internal candidate is the fact that he's already worked with a lot of these guys and he can continue to help them develop over several years. And I just don't know that then that's as attractive as, say, bringing in a McClellan to just try to get you to the playoffs next year.
Right. Now, I'll ignore Todd McClellan personally, that it's him specifically, and just say, like a coach. That. Yes. Yeah. So I'll ignore that because I know that's not, what you're getting at. So, but still with Bylsma, I think because he has that NHL head coaching experience before, he's been a win now coach. And with the system, I don't know how convinced you are of his system being able to succeed right away, but if he can get the buy-in there, I don't see why he doesn't bring both sides of that, where you could make the playoffs right away. Now, I will say it is a legit 20-point gap to make up. Like, this isn't just, and I know the Kraken had, very low shooting percentage this year. You'd expect some of that to regress back toward the mean, but if you look at, I think JFresh posted about it late in the season, like if posting the standings, if every team had league average goaltending and finishing, so basically trying to take out those random indicators, and the Kraken were basically essentially in the same spot. They were
Mm-hmm.
still an 83-point team, 81-point team. It didn't really change very much. So that is a legit 20 points that you have to make up. It is a big challenge, but I think, because, I mean, Dylan, how different is Bilesma's system that he's running in Coachella Valley from what the Kraken ran last year? If you can, call it a cohesive system, right? I mean, could that alone make up enough of the points? And then, of course, you have to have the additions to the roster. That's a must. We'll talk about that later in the podcast about a couple of potential names. But assuming, that's a must. But assuming that happens, I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know. The system, it
Is
certainly,
it a bigger gamble because it's so aggressive?
I think it is a little bit of a bigger gamble, and it would require more buy-in, right? Like you have to really make sure you have the buy-in uh from the guys that are, the forward group, because it's going to force them to play a little bit harder than what Hackstall had them do, because you're just talking from a forechecking perspective. You need two guys up front, and you need them going hard, right? Like the only way the 2-1-2 works is if those two guys up front are really really doing a good job of pressuring. You've got one guy specifically going at the puck carrier, applying that pressure of they're coming in to either steal the puck or lay a hit and push them off the puck, and then you need the other player to make sure that they are in the passing lane that exists for the puck carrier, right? Like that's how you kind of apply the 2-1-2, and you kind of create that pressure. So you need two guys who really really have their heads up, especially that second one, right? It's one thing just to be the pressure on a puck carrier. Like anybody can kind of do that, and the role is fairly simple, right? You're going at the guy who has the puck. It's not that complicated. But the second player who's up there has to be reading where everybody else is for the other team and knowing, okay, where is the outlet pass, and I got to get my body there so that I'm there in between him and the guy that he's going to be passing to. And so it's going to require some more work, from a physical perspective, because you're going to be skating more, and from a mental perspective, because you got to really be paying attention to kind of what's going on. It's not as sit back in the neutral zone and then kind of take things as they come. You're trying to really force the issue. So it's going to be a different approach for the forward group, and you would want that buy-in from them. I got to think, though, after last year, Kraken forward group, realistically, they're professional athletes. They want to win. I got to think they'll buy in to just about anything if they think it's going to lead to more wins than they had the previous year. So I'm not as worried about that. But that would be like the one thing that I think you would have to have is just understanding that, like, yeah, it's going to be a more aggressive approach. It's going to be a more tiring approach. But as we see with the Firebirds, it does lead to results when you can pull it off. So from that aspect, that's kind of where I'm at there.
Okay, no, that makes sense to me. Yeah, I'm not worried about the buy-in. I think whoever is the coach, this group is eager to get back to where they were last year, just from a performance standpoint, and they're going to buy in at least initially, and hopefully, if you get the results early on, you shouldn't have to worry about that.
Yeah, and then I mean, maybe this is a slightly different conversation, but I think we wouldn't be doing our due diligence if we didn't talk about it. We've talked, or certainly you've talked a lot about Todd McClellan and the kind of, why you don't want him to be the Kraken's head coach, and all of, the playoff disappointments and everything that he's had. And I think, for a lot of people, certainly if you were to talk to Penguins fans, they would probably echo similar statements about Dan Bylsma from his time there. Yes, there was the Cup win in 2009. That year that he came in, he only coached 25 regular season games, and then they were able to go on and win the Stanley Cup that year. But after that, I mean, it was a lot of playoff disappointments. You're talking multiple round one losses for teams that were winning 50 games in the regular season and stuff. Now, again, Kraken not anywhere close to this situation that the Penguins were, where it's, cup or bust, right? We're talking about just get to the playoffs. Like that's the bar you kind of need to try to clear here. But I do think that we should maybe bring that up, just because that would be something that I can imagine some people in the organization thinking about, where you're thinking, okay, year one, the expectation is playoffs, but then as we move forward from there, right? is this the guy? Of course, if you're debating between him and Todd McClellan, then it's probably a moot point to even bring it up.
Yeah, no, but I think it's an interesting thing to look at. And yeah, I mean, there's a reason Bosma was let go from Pittsburgh, and that was playoff disappointments. That was a team that was clearly ready to be in the Stanley Cup conversation. I mean, by the time he was let go, they'd go on to win a cup, like what I think 2 years later, and then again 3 years later.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean that's underperformance, and it's worth talking about. And Dylan, I know you were following the Penguins very closely during that time. I mean, you grew up a Penguins fan. That was kind of right in the heyday of everything. And I remember watching lots of Penguins games with you. I mean, kind of what is your read on Bilesma's role in that? And I know I have my own idea of maybe what that was, certainly when it came to playoff time. And I know for anyone that's, watched him recently, it's easy to forget, but that stretch of 4 years of playoff goaltending from Marc-Andre Fleury, like almost historically bad.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at the, save percentage, I know is not, the most telling stat, but, 891, 899, 834, 883, from Fleury in 4 consecutive years. I mean, the goal saved above average I have in front of me, minus 5.8 in 13 games, minus 2.8 in 7 games, minus 13.7 in 6 games, and minus 5.8 in 5 games.
Was that the Flyers series, that really awful one?
Let's see. It was 11-12. Yeah, I think it might have been. I remember that Flyers series very well. But that's the kind of goaltending that I feel like would get almost any coach fired.
Yeah, well, and there's other things to talk about it too. Like, I guess we'll go ahead and deep dive on it because we are on the deep dive. I think there was the goaltending issue. There was some roster construction issues that again are not on the coach. Maybe these are the Shiro years of him as general manager too. And for one, never kind of went and got a different goalie to go, that the coach could go to when you need to in the postseason. So there was that aspect of it. But we've made fun of stuff like on Red Glare, our Patreon podcast, where we talk about, the big days of Crosby playing with Chris Kunitz and Pascal Dupuis, and like kind of how fun and weird that was because he was playing with, you have like the best player in the league playing with guys that are not close to his talent level, but at the same time, like that was their first line. Like you had Pascal Dupuis on the first line, right? Like that's the level of roster at times that you were kind of working with. And the other big thing that I think also doesn't get talked about was you're also talking about like with those years with the first round exits, those are the years where Crosby was dealing with all of his concussion issues, right? So you have your best player not at 100% at all. And certainly come playoff time, when the game gets physical, grittier, especially back then in the early 2010s, it was a brutal game. And so I think there's something to also be said for that, just to throw that out there. But yeah, I think a lot of it had to do with goaltending and roster. Like, you lose Jordan Stahl as your third line center after your cup win, and then, you don't ever replace him. You have no bottom six, right? Like you look at the Sullivan years, they had a bottom six. I think some of that stuff was really kind of what did it. I don't think it was as much Dan Bylsma as maybe some Penguins fans think. I think looking back on it, you can really see a difference once they changed general manager as well as coach. And I think a lot of the improvements that allowed them to win a cup after Bylsma left wasn't so much because Mike Sullivan was necessarily that much better of a coach, but it was just because he had a better roster. He had another goalie he can go to. He had a bottom six he could work with. That matters.
Yeah, it does. And one thing I will mention too, because I do think that is part of a coach's responsibilities. If the goalie's not playing well, go with a different goalie, especially in the playoffs. I think it's better known now than it was in that era where you still had goalies that were real proper workhorse goalies. But after that really awful season from Fleury, which we talked about, the next year in the playoffs, like Bylsma did go away from him. Fleury had another bad start. They went with Thomas Vokoun. They got to the third round. It was an improvement there. And so he was willing to, I know him and the GM, brought in Vokoun, but still, they were willing to make that move.
Yeah. I mean, they had to.
Yeah. At that point, there was really no choice.
Yeah. But I just wanted to have that conversation because I think it is important to talk about all that stuff with Dan Bylsma, given, we've talked about a lot of the coaching style, a little bit of the system stuff before, but I think if he is going to be kind of the candidate that we all want, should probably just talk about his history a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. It's worth doing that for sure. And yeah, if he gets the job too and he's hired, we can do an even deeper dive on it if we
Yeah.
want. You're talking about the Buffalo years, which they got good goaltending there.
Yeah, yeah. Some very Kraken records I'm looking at with that he had with those Buffalo Sabres. So
We'll cross that bridge if and when we get to it.
exactly, exactly. Anything else you want to talk about when it comes to the coaching search there, RJ?
Yeah, there are a couple things because there are two coaches that we mentioned. I think we went over 18 coaches last week in our 2 hour coaching spectacular. Um, Two of them have found jobs elsewhere, though. And like, because I know we've just treated this report as if it's true, with the three names,
Yeah.
but assuming the Kraken cast a wider net, maybe they were potentially looking at some of these guys. So two names are off the board. And the first one is Craig Berube, signing in Toronto as their next head coach. I think it's a good fit for them. As I mentioned last week, I don't think it would have been a good fit for Seattle. Nope. I'm guessing the Kraken aren't too torn up about that one.
I mean, I hope not.
Yeah,
I certainly wasn't going to be a fan of it if that was to come to pass. So I was very kind of relieved when I saw that he went somewhere else, because he was one of the guys that, a lot of people were kind of asking about, talking about. You also had to feel like, just in the kind of, tiered structure of coaches, he would be somebody in that kind of Kraken tier, maybe. So yeah, when I saw that news, I will say I was very relieved.
And I was also relieved that he's going to the Eastern Conference, because he's not the coach you want to face in the playoffs if the Kraken do get back there. So I wouldn't mind facing him in the playoffs with Toronto. That would be pretty fun. But given that it would be a cup final. But otherwise, not too worried about that one. But the name that maybe would be more disappointing to some people to see is not going to be on the market, and that's Rod Brind'Amour. Mm-hmm. As we know, his contract was up with Carolina, but the news came out, Kevin Weeks breaking the news that Brind'Amour signed, I think it was a 5-year extension with Carolina. So he is definitely not in the running for the Kraken head coaching job this time around. How disappointed are you that Brind'Amour is not going to be on the market? Because we did talk about it. I think as much as you had questions about the playoff performance, and those questions still exist after this year, we both thought he would be a good option for the Kraken to bring in if he was available.
Yeah, the two that I really, as I was doing the deep dive for all the stuff we were going to talk about last week, that really grew on me and that I wasn't expecting, was Dean Evason first and foremost. Like, all of a sudden I'm like, I'm in on bringing him on in, and Rod Brind'Amour, and I think I was letting some of the playoff stuff and the frustrations of the kind of the same issues year after year. And those are very real, and those would bother me if he was to coach the Kraken. But I think everything else about him just makes sense, and he's a really, really good coach. And Carolina did the smart thing by keeping him, even though he needs to adjust things in the postseason very clearly. If I'm them, I would have had that conversation with him before signing him to another 5-year deal. But I think that one hurts certainly a lot more than Berube.
Right, and it also makes more sense, just given that, again, we never really heard any serious talk about him listening to other offers or anything else. Like, I wasn't counting on it, but it would have been that home run hire, but just not in the cards. But I don't think we should be too disappointed about it, just because I don't think it was ever really a possibility.
I certainly don't, because again, it's one of those things where, for all of these coaches that are available, and if he was to have been let go and become available, there's a lot of jobs out there in the NHL. And realistically, just looking at it, Kraken job's probably not the best one, right? And so for if you're going to talk about candidates that might be the best available candidate, it was going to take some work from Ron Francis to get them to come to Seattle for those top like 2 or 3 guys. So yeah, I think it wasn't likely that he was going to leave Carolina, and then obviously after that, I don't know how likely it would have been that he would have chosen Seattle anyway.
Yeah, I think that's probably the case. Now, one more thing to mention on this too that could be potentially positive for the Kraken if they are kind of casting that wider net from a coaching search perspective. Updates today on the 32 Thoughts podcast from Elliot Friedman. It sounds like the Kings are really leaning toward bringing their interim head coach Jim Hiller back and kind of making him the permanent coach, which that would get rid of a very desirable, I think, coaching job in LA, that's always, one of the top jobs available if it's there, because it's just a, it's a great place to live and to be, that people like, and a team that's ready to compete. So that could potentially, be off the market, which, maybe if there's a candidate that was looking at that over a Seattle job could help. And then also it sounds like Winnipeg is probably leaning towards internal candidates, somebody on Rick Bonus's coaching staff too. So that would be two, potential contending teams that maybe wouldn't be available for other coaches.
Right, and I would consider those jobs above the Kraken job just because, and
I
I'll
would too.
explain that a little bit, because I'm not trying to put down the Kraken when I say something like that. It is just strictly, as we talked about last week, and as really everybody's talking about, as you had multiple coaches fired before their extensions kick in, including Dave Haxtell, all of this stuff. The coaching lifespan right now, if you're a coach, I believe is under 3 years on average. Like it's not great. It's right around 3 years, 3 seasons. So if you're going to be signing on to go and coach a team for 3 years, why not? And you have your choice of jobs. Why not choose a team that's going to be in a cup window? Right? Why choose a team that might be 2 or 3 years out from a cup window? You might not make it long enough to really get there with that group, right? And that's realistically what Seattle is versus, say, an LA for sure, or maybe even a Winnipeg, right? Where you have a lot of, pieces still in their prime that you can work with there, where if you just don't run a goalie into the ground, you probably get out of the first round. So you know what I mean? Like that's the aspect of it that makes the Seattle job unattractive for teams, is just that there, for coaches, I mean, is that there are other teams that are in their window, and when your lifespan as a coach is only going to be 3-ish years, you kind of should choose the jobs that align with that are going to give you 3 years of competitive hockey, right? Like if you're a top candidate, that's what I would be choosing. And I think that's what, makes some of those other jobs more desirable than the Kraken gig. It's not that the Kraken gig is that bad. It's just that those other jobs just make sense for what that landscape has been for coaches over the last couple off seasons, and how many of them, are fired before extensions kick in and stuff.
Exactly. I mean, those teams were playing playoff hockey this spring, and the Kraken weren't. I think it's simple enough, and people can understand that and respect it.
Yeah. So, but that is good, because I think also if the Kings go with Hiller, it's not a great hire for them, and they're in the division, and I take that.
Agreed. Yeah,
All right.
I don't know. He has some different ideas. He's going to go in a different direction, reportedly, than what McClellan was doing. They just didn't have time to implement it during the season, so they must be impressed by those ideas.
Sure. We'll see. We'll see. We'll talk about it more on Red Glare when he gets the job officially.
Oh yeah.
All right, then let's talk trade targets here for the last 10 minutes or so, RJ. And some names that have popped up that aren't Mitch Marner.
That's right. So a couple non-Mitch Marner names kind of popped up in trade rumors recently about teams maybe willing to move on from some scoring forwards, or maybe even some scoring forwards wanting out, but names that could potentially, be linked to the Kraken, later in the offseason. And the first one I want to start with, we were just talking about Winnipeg a little bit in that coaching job, but the first name is Nikolai Ehlers. So he is a scoring winger for the Winnipeg Jets. I think he's done pretty well in games against the Kraken. He's had some highlight reel plays that we've had the chance to see in Seattle. But the story on Ehlers, well, first of all, it's worth talking about his contract situation, because that's really what's driving this. So he has 1 year left on his contract at $6 million cap hit, and then he is an unrestricted free agent after that. So then he'd be free to sign anywhere. He's 28 years old. And so the Jets may be looking at, if they would not be able to re-sign him, you'd want to trade him now and get what you can for him. You'll see that with a lot of players, 1 year left. And so might be looking to move him this offseason. That has been in the rumor mill. So he's a scoring forward. He's never hit the 30 goal mark yet, but he's got seasons of 29, 28, and then recently this season 25 goals. So that's kind of his goal scoring production. Then he's, when he's on, he's a 60-point player or so. He's done better pace wise. Like a couple of years ago, he had 55 points in 62 games. So that's a pretty good pace. But really the story on Ehlers, and he's kind of an analytics darling. A lot of the analytics people like him because he has really good underlying numbers. The problem is he just doesn't get that much ice time. The skill is apparent when you watch him, but the opportunity hasn't been there. this past season averaged under 16 minutes of ice time. I mean, really, that's like third line minutes. Still put a 60-point player though. So he's one of those guys that if you're bringing him in, the idea is you would give him a bigger role. You would see if he really can be a top line type forward, and you'd give him that extra opportunity and hope that the numbers would increase because of it.
Yeah. And I think,
do you like that? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I was going to say 16 minutes. I mean, that's a first-line player on the Kraken.
Yeah, under Hackstall it is. Yeah, that is true. So,
so I don't know how much he'd get. But yes, presumably under a new coach, the Kraken lines should play slightly different when it comes to the minutes game. We've talked about that in the past. That is the one element about it that makes it more attractive to me to go out and get somebody to get him specifically over, say, some of the middle of the road free agents that are just going to be available this year. Because obviously in this situation, you're going to have to trade for him. You're going to have to give up assets. And then on top of that, you're also going to probably want to work out an extension with him. So you're talking about a contract plus assets to bring him in. And when you look at like the point production, look, there's a lot of forwards that are going to be in that 55 to 60 point range that are going to be available in free agency. But I look at them and you're either talking about more aging guys like Tyler Toffoli or Vladimir Tarasenko that are 32. You're talking about big question marks in like a Jonathan Drouin, right? Like it's hard to have a bigger question mark than that. Or a guy like Teuvo Teravainen, right? Leaving Carolina, but again, a little bit older, and a little bit of a different situation. And then I think you bring up the good point of, yeah, if the Kraken are going to have a more traditional ice time approach with their players, Nick Ehlers is a top line player on this Kraken team. He just is. And so you give him that opportunity and you see if that production can kind of keep up with the additional ice time. And then all of a sudden you're talking about maybe adding a 70-point player. And all of a sudden that's like you go out in free agency and sign Jake Gensel. Like that's a big difference. And so I think that makes it enough of a gamble to go ahead and try to do a trade with a guy like him versus maybe some other 50-ish point wingers where I would just say, no, just go sign Tyler Toffoli to a 2-year deal. Right. But I think with Nick Ehlers, it's worth it probably to go ahead and roll the dice on that.
He's a better option than a lot of the ones that I see out there in free agency. And I wonder what it would cost in terms of assets too. I mean, you might have to give up a pretty good prospect, and that's something you might not want to do. I mean, the Kraken have draft capital too, but it's, for me with Ehlers, it's hard not to think of a comparable player that the Kraken actually brought in a couple years ago. And I don't want to sour anyone on this too much because, again, I like Ehlers, I like the player, but I think of Andre Burakovsky, where you look at Ehlers this season, 61 points, about a little under 16 minutes of average ice time per game. Mm-hmm. You look at Andre Burakovsky 2 years ago with Colorado before the Kraken brought him in, 61 points, 16 minutes, 16 seconds average ice time per game. And it'd be the same idea. You bring in a guy like that, give him more opportunity, and he can kind of blossom into potentially even your leading scorer, like Burakovsky was until the big injury in his first season with the Kraken, and he hasn't been quite right since. You look at Ehlers, there is a bit of an injury history. He did play all 82 games this year, but previous seasons he played 45 the year before. He played 47 a few years before that. He's had some MCL issues. He had like a sports hernia type of thing that he was dealing with. The injury history is not nearly as extensive as Andre Burakovsky, so I don't want to compare it one for one there. Mm-hmm. But that would be the risk, I guess. And for Burakovsky, if he stays healthy, I think that experiment works out. Like that acquisition works. Ehlers, I think you'd be hoping for kind of a similar thing, except that he stays healthy. I don't know. Do you think that comparison is apt?
No, I do. Like there's two things about it. There's that aspect of it, and yes, we've already seen this experiment kind of go down. Although again, it's fair to wonder, just given how the lines always kind of shaked out under Hackstall, whether or not the experiment was run properly to begin with, when it comes to Berkey. But there's also like the other thing that gives me pause about it, like, because I talked about the reasons why I would be in favor of it. Now talking about reasons why I maybe wouldn't be willing to take the risk and give up assets for it. It's not so much the injury thing for me. It's just the fact that like it's very possible that the point production stays the same because Yes, he might get 2 or 3 more minutes a night, but the quality of line mate goes down, right? The production
Yeah.
around him that he can take part in goes down because he's not playing in Winnipeg, where he's been, able to play with some really, really high end level guys. There's a good chance he gets thrown on the line with, say, Matty Beniers or Shane Wright. And obviously Shane Wright's got the potential to do that stuff. Matty has the potential, but we got to see it. And we got to see it consistently from them. Versus, you go out there and you're able to play with a guy like Kyle Connor, right? Like, yeah, that's going to help your point total.
Yeah, definitely, and that's actually the concern we had with Burakovsky too.
Yeah.
There were the two elements of it, and Burakovsky, I think, even more extreme because he was able to play on a very, very talented Avalanche team. I'm looking at this season, right? Ehlers' most common line mates, line he was on the most, was with Mark Scheifele and Gabe Vilardi. Now, those are two very good line mates.
Yep.
I don't know that you could find a match for that, in Seattle. Second most common, though, was with Cole Perfetti and Vladislav Nemesnikov. I think you could find comparable line mates skill-wise to that in Seattle. I think those aren't like world beater type of guys. And then with Scheifele and Connor was the third most common line combo, and of course those are very good line mates too. So I think it is a valid question on Ehlers. Who is he playing with in Seattle, and how much of a step down is it? But he's had success. I look at the expected goals percentage playing with any of those guys.
Yeah, and there's other things about it that make it attractive. Like, you would wonder, well, look, he's going to be on power play units with those guys. He only had 7 power play assists this year. That's it. Of his 61 points, only 7 came from the power play. That's encouraging that it was, 5-on-5 production. That means it's a little bit more sustainable. The other thing is he had 233 shots. We've been talking, the Kraken need to be a little bit more, or at least, from last year, they needed to be a little bit more of a volume shooting team. They needed guys that were going to throw pucks on net. He's a guy who throws pucks on net. I mean, that would be, I can't even imagine a number that big for the Kraken.
I know. Yeah, definitely. He'd be the first real true volume shooter, I think, that they've had, maybe ever. So that would be interesting to see. And also it's interesting to see how it would fit in potentially with a new coach.
Yes. Yeah.
So when it comes to Ehlers, then I guess there's a lot of question marks, I guess, conditional yeses or nos. But like, what are you thinking overall? Yes or no? Also on the extension front, I do wonder if he'd be more likely to sign an extension given that he's Danish, by the way. Maybe he plays with Oliver Bjorkstrand. Maybe he's got a friend in the room. I don't know. Maybe that could help.
I never want to rely on that, but it does seem to end up playing out. So maybe, just maybe. The other, the things that make me lean yes over again trying somebody in free agency that's going to be of like similar point production, right? Is the fact that he is just, I think, I just believe in his skill, in his playmaking. Like, I remember when he was coming out in his draft year, right? And he was taken 9th overall in 2014. I mean, he was such a skilled player. I think he still can be such a skilled player. And that is something that the Kraken need, is they need somebody who can, yes, be a volume shooter, but somebody who can also just make plays. And he is a guy capable of making plays that I feel like is of a higher caliber than, say, going out and trying to get a Teuvo Teravainen or a Jonathan Drouin or a Sean Monahan, right? Like, I think of him as a better playmaker than those guys.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, he's a guy, just you never want to rely too much on the eye test, but just watching him play, the skill is just so apparent.
Yeah.
And you wonder why he's never really gotten that opportunity to play more. But he's just such a skilled player. And the kind of guy who, I know it's not the top priority for the Kraken, but certainly would bring some excitement that they didn't have this season.
Yep.
So he's fun to watch. I would enjoy that.
Yeah.
All right. So a conditional yes, I guess, on Nikolai Ehlers, depending on the return, depending if you could get him signed. And he'd be fun to have around, that's for sure. All right. So moving on to the other name that's kind of been in rumors recently, and that is Martin Necas, player for the Carolina Hurricanes. He is younger than Ehlers. He's a 25-year-old forward. And interesting, kind of background here. He actually last season, not this past season that just happened, but the season before that, put up 71 points. That's pretty good production, 28-goal season. A little bit of a step down this year, but his ice time also took a step down. He played about a minute less on average per game. And he's he's kind of stuck behind some very good players on a very good Hurricanes roster, right? That forward group has a lot of depth. It has a lot of high end skill. And according to the rumor mill, it sounds like he maybe wants a little more opportunity to be a proper first line player and feels that he can do that. Contract situation. So his contract is up this year. He is an RFA, a restricted free agent. So the Kraken would still need to trade for his rights, and they'd need to sign him to a new contract right away. He also has arbitration rights, so that's a little bit of the negotiating benefit that he has. But really, if you're trading for him, you probably have a contract already in mind and worked out. So why would the Canes move him? Because they have a lot of good forwards that they don't maybe have all the cap space to sign. They're probably going to try and take a run at maybe bringing back a Jake Gensel, who played really well for them, and somebody might have to shake loose, and that might be Necas. So Dylan, what are we thinking about Necas? Do you think that he is that 71-point player, potentially even better long term if he gets that first line opportunity?
No. And so it's kind of like a different situation from Ehlers, right? One of the things that I found very encouraging about Ehlers was the fact that he's able to put up 60 points with very little of that production coming from the power play. You look at Necas and why he had 71 points and why that's kind of an outlier season for him versus all of his other seasons. It's not so much the ice time, it's the power play numbers. And he spiked and had 17 power play assists that season versus 5 this year, right? Roughly the same power play goal numbers. He just was crazy more productive on the power play in 1 year. And we have seen guys do that before, and it is not necessarily a sign of future success, right? Like you can just have an outlier season like that, particularly if the team as a whole kind of has an outlier season like that on the power play. You can kind of just raise everybody's numbers for that 1 year. And I think that's why you see him jump from being a 50-ish point player to all of a sudden a 71-point player that one season. I just don't think that's something he can replicate consistently. Certainly not in Seattle. I mean, obviously, we're going to have a very different looking power play for Seattle moving forward, or at least we better. But still, it's that gives me pause in a way that it doesn't for Ehlers.
Right. I think there's less upside talent-wise with Ehlers. He is younger. He's got a little bit more time to come into his own, but still, I think we're probably looking more around the production that he had this year. 53 points, 24 goals, which the Kraken already have a lot of forwards who, produce those kinds of numbers, at least when they're healthy. You're probably looking at like Oliver Bjorkstrand type numbers maybe. And the quality of teammates, I think, is going to go down compared to what he had in Carolina as well. So that's something you have to worry about. Basically, bringing him in would be bringing in another one of those, $5.5 million type of forwards who can play anywhere in the top 6, top 9 kind of thing. I don't know that's what the Kraken need right now. Certainly not if, the return on a trade is going to have to be pretty substantial, just given he's an RFA. The Canes have some leverage there. Yeah, I'm with you on this one. I mean, I could see it maybe being a little more likely because you know who drafted him?
Yeah.
Originally with Carolina. That's Ron Francis.
Yeah.
So there is another Ron Francis connection. I'm sure, he likes the player enough if he did end up drafting him. But given what the return is going to be, if it's cheap enough, if we're talking about another Bjorkstrand type trade where you're just giving away some mid-round picks, I say go for it. If you can, especially at that age, like that's always going to be good value. Mm-hmm. But I think the return would have to be a lot more than that, and I'd personally stay away.
Yeah, again, because I think you would be paying more than you would have to pay to just go out and get somebody in free agency that's going to realistically have similar production.
Yeah, he's a complimentary piece.
Right. And
a good one at that.
Yeah, but that's
the
not
Kraken the Kraken are full of complimentary pieces. Yeah. That's what they have a ton of. That's all they are. So yeah, I'm with you on that.
Yeah. So I think that's to me the difference there between those two guys is I would go ahead and maybe try to do that for Ehlers. I just don't think I could for Necas.
Yep. All right. Well, we're agreed on those two, and I'm looking forward to see what other names just kind of pop up because those two names, I mean, they've been talked about a little bit over the last couple of years, but really coming into the trade rumors, that's part of the fun of the offseason, and especially as soon as we get into the Cup final and beyond that too, there's going to be a lot more names that pop up in situations that maybe we didn't see coming.
Yeah, no, definitely. It is definitely the case, and it's going to be exciting to see what directions the Kraken can go in this offseason to improve the roster and try to make up that 20 points in the standings, because it's a lot. And,
it's a lot of ground.
Yeah, it's a lot of ground that they're gonna have to make up. But it's gonna be exciting to see how they go about doing it. That's for sure. I know everybody's really waiting for the offseason to kind of kick into gear for the Kraken here, right? We just gotta wait for all these darn good teams have to play in the playoffs. RJ,
I know.
Hurry up.
What's up with that?
Just give the cup to Dallas or Florida already. Just pick one.
I'd be on board with that.
Do a coin flip and just give it to them. Let's go. We will see. In the meantime, though, we do get to watch an element of the Kraken organization being one of those really good teams, and that is, of course, the Firebirds. It's just unfortunate we're gonna have to wait 5 to 7 days before we get to see them play again.
Are the Firebirds too good?
It's just
We
too
don't
good.
get enough games to watch.
Yeah, no, we want to be able to watch more hockey for this Kraken organization. The Firebirds don't let us do that because they win too quickly. What a problem to have. Well, I am looking forward, though, to watching that other series to see who the Firebirds will match up against, as well as, we'll see if more rumors come out regarding the Kraken coaching search over the next week or so. But until then, we will just see everybody next time.
Hey everyone, before we go, we just wanted to give a quick shout out to all of our awesome patrons over at patreon.com/Emerald City Hockey, especially our Terror of the Deep patrons:
Aaron, Absurdly Sane, Alaska Joe, Alex, Amanda, Amy, Andrew, Andy, Anonymous, Anthony, Becca, Beef, Ben, Brad, Brady, Brett and Sarah, Bryce, Burnt Creme, Caden, Kaylin, Kat, Kaylin, Chandler, Charles, Shazzle Dazzle, Chip, Chris, Clutch, Cody, Connor, Coop, Corey, Cutter, Dan, Danny39, Denise, DJ Singletone, Duthan, Dylan, Evie99, Eli, Elizabeth, Ethan, Evan, Fischl, Fusion Mix, Gaby, Gabrielle, Gary, Gregory, Helena, Habak, Jane, Jenna, Jessica, John, Joni, Joseph, Josh, Joshua, Julia, Justin, Katie, Kepler, Kevin, Kitty B. Kraken, Cole, Kyle,
L. Bell, Leanne, Levin, Light, Lena, Little Tennis Guy 8, Lonnie, Mac and Cheese, Maeve, Mark, Martin, Max, Maya, Michael, Michelle, Nick, Night Drop, Nunya, Olivia, Paige, Patty, Paul, Rayanne, Randall, Rebecca, Robert, Rock Liquor, Ryan, Sarah, Scott, Sia Kraken, Sean, Sergey, Sergeant Pickles, Shannon, Skeletal Tendency, Stacy, Steven, Striatic, Tasty Kobold, Taylor, Team 114 Chris, Ty, Virginia, Wendy, Where the Slovakians At, and Zoe. Thank you so much for making all this possible. We really appreciate your support.